I guess I wanted to talk about January 6th a little bit, and get your thoughts on, in the aftermath, there was a lot of sort of ratcheting up of similar language that was, utilized against Muslim Americans after 9/11 as to like, okay, domestic terrorists, blah, blah, blah. And
Mhm.
objectively, I'm not going to use the word terrorist, but anti-government white supremacist extremist violence is the number one, according to the FBI, the number one fastest growing threat in the United States. And it probably is if the FBI is saying it, and you're like, I don't know if they have really like an agenda to go against white nationalists, because they've pretty much been okay with them up until this point. So it must be really bad for them to be flagging it. And as we saw on January 6th, look at what happens. But in terms of actually trying to, root out, de-radicalize, if you will, if I can even say that, to try and, stop some of the extremism, the white nationalist extremism that, yeah, scares me. And I think most people who listen to the show fucking far more than anything else. What are your thoughts? How do you see the way and the role that, like, if the government could play any kind of positive role in trying to bring people back from that kind of radicalization, that kind of violence, what would that look like?
To be honest with you, I look at it a little bit differently, with extreme skepticism. And I think that the term radicalization or whatever, all of that is extremely vague, and it's a way to avoid talking about political issues.
Mm.
What is it that is driving these people to some sort of ideology or action? What is it that they care about? What is it that's, angering them in terms of policy? Not just like they're radical, they're insane, they're horrible, just, without any explanation, without any context. And so what we've seen post 9/11 is that Muslims were just the beginning. Muslims were radical, Muslims had a problematic ideology, Muslims had a problematic politics, but we always contended that these policies to infiltrate, to arrest people on crimes of ideology, on thought crimes, were always going to be expanded to other communities, non-Muslim communities. And so what does the government do? I mean, the government is interested always in expanding its own powers and, developing this expansive spying surveillance program. They don't want to give that up. They want to know exactly what people are saying. They want to spy on them, and they want to, to control them, to control what we think, what we feel, and to not be able to, resist any policies that may be unpopular, that may, hurt regular Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we've seen in this Michigan governor kidnapping plot, if you guys are familiar with that case, this is something that the FBI called a slam dunk case. I mean, everybody's like, holy shit, like they wanted to kidnap this governor. And guess what? We find out a few months later, 12 FBI informants and several more undercover agents concocted the entire thing from A to Z. These were people who were like upset about like COVID, like restrictions. Like it was so dumb, but they needed to exaggerate this threat in this country and concocted this whole thing. Among
That's
the
wild.
people, it's crazy. Yeah. I mean, there's an article in The Guardian. I highly recommend that your viewers read it. There's a case that we in the coalition talk about, which is this Kansas militia. These are people who were radicalized by, Donald Trump's rhetoric in the summer of 2016 after the Pulse nightclub. The guy was a Muslim. They were like, oh my God, we need to get Muslims and whatever. And yes, like they hated Islam. They were anti-Muslim. I am Muslim, but I believe it in a person's freedom of speech, even if it's to not like, a certain people or to be opposed to them, as long as you're not taking any actual steps to commit a crime. That's your freedom to believe whatever you want. I mean, that's what this country is supposedly built on. And so what does the government do? They bring in this, he was a homeless guy, an informant. This was in Kansas City, Missouri, and they pay him $60,000 they're like literally like militia rejects. Like the militia didn't even want them. So they were like kicked out of the
They tried to coup Venezuela. They couldn't do that. They got out of prison.
Yeah. And this informant introduced these three guys they didn't even know each other. And he told them, like, this needs to be your target, the Somali like housing complex. This is what you're going to do. And, started pushing them to go along with this plot. These were people who had substance abuse problems, history of, mental health issues, really like just these hapless guys that were very easily manipulated into this plot. And that's what the government's doing, is truly scraping the bottom of the barrel. And so they ended up being charged, convicted on this, domestic terrorism case. And people actually believed that they were going to bomb this plot. And I mean, they were going to go along with this plot to bomb these Somalis. And, it seems almost counterintuitive. Like, you guys are Muslims and you're defending these people wanted to blow up, but it's the exact tactics that were used on Muslim communities that are now being, done, outside of the community. So for us, it's about the principle, defending everyone's rights from being targeted in these phony sting operations.
My God, that yes, that story, especially the Whitmer and the kidnapping plot story, that was this week, and
Right.
I've yet to wrap my brain around it. But yes, the fact that you and your organization is actually, yeah, has a principled stand when it comes to these BS entrapment plots is, I mean, like, it is, just the idea that the
There's
same
no
race would
entrapment
be
defense. Yeah, there's no entrapment defense. As long as, yeah, I mean, it's I can go on and on about this, but yeah, I mean, you have to defend the principle, because, one day it's your community, the next it's another vulnerable community. There are no lessons being learned, and it's going to just continue. So, I mean,
what's crazy to me, what I'm saying is, like, the same folks would never extend that principle to Muslim Americans. The like white nationalists, those folks, they would never be like, no, their whole thing as, January 6th insurrectionists are getting locked up is, no, we don't deserve this. Black and brown people deserve to be locked up.
right,
We don't deserve to be locked up. These conditions are, this sandwich is awful, right?
right,
Meanwhile, prison abolitionists or people who believe in reform are like, see what we've been talking about? We actually believe that everyone should not be in these kinds of conditions, blah, 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 blah. So, yeah,
and that's a challenge, because it's never gonna, passing any sort of like domestic terrorism policies and bills or whatever, of course, that's always going to come primarily to crack down on Black and brown communities. But people don't realize that it's being expanded outward, to whites. I mean, to put it plainly.
Yeah, no, and like, yes, I think that's really fascinating, and we gotta dig and talk more about that story. I guess I guess any final thoughts? We have to move on to our
Or
last. I mean, last thing I just wanted to say is, it'd be great in a really good way to, root out the so-called radicals, or like, especially root out white supremacy, not run white supremacist candidates for
Mhm.
office, not keep allowing representatives who supported overturning a democratic election to hold office, to still be there.
Mhm.
Like, the collusion is so, I mean, it is very funny. It is the whole, like, idea that the FBI is gonna root out white supremacy is a little bit of the, like, the cops are gonna investigate their own murders. I mean, that's all it is. What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/Bitchuation Room. Do it.